good, yeah. So you have the pixels, and you also have the EMs, which is just a different measure. And then we have percentages. And percentages are actually pretty nice because they'll enable us to have some more responsive behavior throughout our application and the sizes of our screens. Then we also have the font family, right, which is just the type of font that you want to apply to your tag. We have the font weight, so whether it's bold, it's italic, it's light, we'll be playing a bit with that. And then the text decoration, which in this case is none. And the reason why we usually want to apply some type of text decoration to our anchor tags is because of the default behavior that the links usually give. And I think the best way to show this is if I show you an actual site. So if I go into Admios site, for example, and I open up my inspector, for those of you who don't remember, the inspector is just the way in which we can tap into the design of a given site. So for every website, every web application that exists on the internet, we always have access to its HTML and its CSS. And I mean, at least for me at the beginning, I was like, this is insane. What does this mean? But it really is really helpful to just start getting into seeing how other people are doing all this cool stuff and how they're building their own sites. So if I go into the head and delete it, that means that immediately I have no design linked to the page, right? So this is how a page would look like without design. It's hideous, right? It's just plain HTML with not much fun stuff to play with. But we can see here that these are links, right? And we can see them because if you've been in the internet for at least a few years, I'm sure you've seen this behavior before, where whenever you click on a link, that's when it becomes purple. Otherwise, it's blue. It's always underlined. It'll always be Times New Roman, which is the worst possible font that still exists on the web. And the thing is that this is just the default behavior that comes with the browser. So whenever you're designing, just keep in mind that concept of the default baggage that each tag brings along, because usually we're going to get some funky stuff happen, and we need to be able to spot where that's coming from. So I just wanted to do that so that I can show you that this is usually the default behavior that comes with anchor tags. And that's something that we're going to be trying to switch or eliminate, change colors, and design to however we want. Now, any questions up until here? Leave it on the chat. I'm reading. All good? Okay, I'll carry on. So the interesting thing, and this is something that at least I hadn't put into perspective when I first started programming, is that most websites are usually just, from a design perspective, a combination of fonts and colors. You'll see that if you have good fonts and good colors, it immediately looks like a whole other page. The rest is just layout, positioning, selecting the right images, but really the font and the colors are the ones that make sort of that heavy lifting for a website. And I think from what I've read and from what I've seen, usually for both of these, you don't want to be doing more than two. So I would say before you even start sort of playing with the design of the website and actually coding it, just maybe take a step back and see what are your top 3 colors that you want to have throughout. What are those 2 fonts? Honestly, I would never do 3, but I think some people might have arguments against it, so I'll leave it at that. And the cool thing is that you can always play with the line height, with the letter spacing, with grays, with opacity. So it's not that your site will be just dull, being like black or white, but there's that huge opacity and space in between for you to really be playing with, so that it adds more width and more space to your page. So let's start with colors. Usually when we're thinking of colors, there are 4 main ways in which you can add them onto your page. The first one is what I told you before, that this list of colors that the browsers allow. They're usually pretty lame. I mean, I would say they're not really used, but it's nice to know that they exist. And of course, every color that the browser has will always have its sort of hex, decimals, and RGB components. And these are these three other names that I've put underneath. So all of these different ways of writing will write absolutely the same thing, which is represent this bright orange color that we have to our right. And here the difference is just how you're putting them out there. There's not that much difference aside from that, except on this fourth one. So the key thing here is the following. RGB means red, green, and blue, right? So the first number would be the number of red, the second one, the number of green, the third one, the number of blue. And then we have this extra little number in here. So if you remember what I was telling you before regarding opacity, this is a really nice way to add some different opacity to your colors and just have that look a bit different. So for example, in this orange over here, you see that this is as bright as one can get. And that's why this is 1, right? If I wanted to just be completely invisible, I would turn that 1 into 0, and immediately that color would disappear. So keep that in mind, that this is a really nice tool to keep playing with that depth to your site. Now, the thing here, sorry, I put these the other way around. This is CSS, this is HTML. And so what I wanted to show you here is that I'm grabbing on this header to tag, I'm calling it in my CSS, and then I'm just passing a property and a color to it so that it looks like this. So here, remember what I was telling you before, the color property will always be adapted to the text, and then it displays it like that. So not much science to it. The colors are just pretty usually straightforward. Now, where to get some colors? How do we even start getting an idea of nice color palettes? These are some cool resources that I use pretty often actually when I'm designing. This is, I think, my favorite. Color Hunt I use when I'm a bit lazier, but the cool thing about Coolers is that you just press space and you get all these crazy patterns, right? So let's say I really like this hot pink, I'll lock that one up, and then I can just keep pressing space bar and getting different colors, right? So I can just keep adding them to my list. I like this, and actually this is a nice palette. Let's just keep it like that, right? So at this point, I already have my palette set up and I don't need to stress up about much else. I have my hex decimals underneath, which I can just copy. I can have them in all sorts of different craziness. If you're more of a graphical designer, maybe that's your background, then you probably know this site, but either way, this is a nice hack to have. And the other one I put up is Color Hunt. And I put it up because, like I said, it's a bit lazier. You just sort of scroll through the other palettes that other people have already designed for you, and you can just pick one. You have your hex code in here as well. So that's pretty nice. I left these, all of these, you should be able to find them in the page that I provided you last class. Let me just share that in here as well since the beginning so that you have it. But here, oh, sorry, I didn't send it right. Right. So if you tap into there, you'll be able to see these resources and a bit more. So cool. So that's colors. We'll leave it at that because we'll dive in a bit deeper once we start actually doing some live demos. But the next thing I want to get onto is fonts. And with fonts, you usually have different, you can get fonts from all over the internet. We can import them from locally from our computers. We can import them from the web. We can also call some of the default ones that the browser has, like for example, Times. Like I said, the browser loves that since the beginning of the Times, pun intended. And then you also have Courier, which is more of that one that's like monospaced, so sort of the ones that typewriters used to have. And this right next to it will just be their sort of their defaults to go back to in case the first one fails. So that's just sort of a thing to keep in the brain for what that's doing. But the really fun part when playing with fonts is to edit how they're looking, right? So we can do a lot by just adding some more space in between letters, by changing their size, by changing the height that they're going to be occupying. Like we said before, we can also add in some weight to it. So this is going to be really useful for when we start thinking of information design and architecture and how we want to set up our contrast of what matters more or less throughout our website. And some nice resources. Google Fonts, honestly, is a great one. It's just really easy to use. So we get sort of like a marketplace as if we're in Amazon. And let's say I like this one. I'll just tap into it. I'll select it. And what I get is a bit of my cart, right? So this is my cart. And I click on embed. And then this would be the link that I will add to the head of my HTML. And that's it. Just by doing that, I immediately have that font in my website, and I can just call it like this. So this is a nice resource of free fonts that we can use. They have all sorts of craziness. And to be honest, it can be a bit overwhelming, right? Especially if we're thinking of two fonts. I'm like, how do I start thinking of which two fonts to combine? What goes with what? Like, the possibilities are limitless. And so at that point, that's when my friend Font Pair comes along. And Font Pair is just, again, a bit of like Color Hunt, but for fonts. So it's just it's pairs of fonts that people have already decided that go well together. And we get the different types. So if you want a sans serif with a sans serif, and for those of you who are not designers like myself, I had to learn this. Serif is just this bit of the extra sort of dash that you see at the end of letters. So you see both of these don't have it, whereas if you have two serifs, then like both of them will have that extra line at the end of words. So it's just different types of fonts that you can get. And usually, if I'm not mistaken, all of the ones that are in Font Pair we can find at Google Fonts. So it's a nice resource to have. Now, questions up until here? Okay, so this is where it's gonna get a bit trickier, right? So we have our fonts, we have our colors, everything is great, but now we need to add in a bit of that extra layout component, right? Because at this point, if we just have fonts and colors, we will still have this website looking like this, but just have this be orange and have it be in a nice font, right? But without any layout, we have no way of really adapting what we're doing. So layout can come in lots of different forms. It can get very advanced, very crazy, very quick. But what I want to show you right now is just a way to start really conceptualizing and thinking about it. So if I go back to the slide with the drawing, you can see here that I drew some boxes, right? And the reason why I did this is because we can think of our computer as just being a sort of like tons of square boxes, one right next to the other, which are the pixels, right? So because of that, usually when we're thinking of layout, we should think of our screen as a bunch of columns and rows. So that when we're designing, we're really thinking of boxes. So this is a nice plugin that I have. It's called Toggle. And what it allows me to do is to really see the different boxes that any site is being drawn upon. So I can do this. I can do this again in the Admios site so you can see. Where if I'm here and I go into my Toggle site, I can see all of the different boxes as this one drawn on. So I can see that this is one box that contains different text elements. This would be an unordered list. And I can see all the different boxes that a layout will require, right? So what we're going to be doing now is that we're going to be creating our own boxes in our site. And these boxes are called divs. D-I-V, it just means divisions, right? So each division will have its own width its own height, its own margin, and its own padding. And for me, this is something that is very complicated. I was like, what's the difference between a margin and a padding? Because at first, it might look like it behaves the same way. But really, I think this picture explains it really well, where the big difference is on where the spacing is going, right? So the padding will be that space that's between your content. So let's say between your line of text that says hello world and the end of that div. So if we see here and the example, so this is a text that doesn't have much padding, right? Because it's right next to the end of that div. Whereas, for example, this image has some padding around it because the div ends at the end. Now, it might not seem to make much sense why this would matter at the moment, but believe me, once we start really coding stuff, it would be very, very good to know, especially when we're thinking of buttons, right? I think buttons are the best example to think of padding, because usually buttons, you'll want to have some spacing in between the text and the border around it, right? So this is a situation, for example, where padding will be very useful, whereas margin is usually better used to divide one object from the next. And of course, the width and the height, how big they are, how small they are, that's pretty intuitive. And then we also have some different components or different attributes that we can give to that box. And this is just one example of them. I'll share some other ones throughout the demo, but I just wanted to show this one out because they can be as simple as just color blue, or as complex as like box shadow, and then we're passing on 4 values. That's like to the right, to the on the bottom, what it looks like, how far it is from the object itself, and then the color of the shadow, right? So in the resources that I passed in the page that I sent over in the chat, I set up some resources that you can check out all the different options that we can pass with CSS. And at first, this will be very intimidating and crazy because we can do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. There's even some really fun animations that could be done with CSS, and we'll touch a bit of that later in the demo today. But really, I would say the best advice is to just first draw it, think of how you want it to look like, and then start looking around for what stuff we have. Especially as you get more familiarized with the different options, you'll be able to Google it better. And honestly, if you know how to Google, you know how to code. Everything is online. So let's get to the fun part. Now, last class, we set up our developer folder. Before I carry on, any questions here? Guys, I'm going too fast, too slow, all good. Awesome. So let's open up our developer folder. If you don't remember, we should just drag it onto our text editor and it'll open it up right for us, which is pretty convenient. So the first thing we want to do is just check out my HTML from our previous class. So like we talked about before, it's just a head with some information on it. That won't be seen by the user. We have a body, and I'll actually delete this because I did this for trial, but I want to see what happens when we don't have that link tag over there. So the first thing that we want to do is add our style CSS file. So this is where we're going to be adding on all of our CSS design. So I just added a file, called it style CSS, command save, call it like that, where my developer folder saved. Awesome, immediately added to my folder. Now, if I start writing here, let's say body and pass it color black, or let's say something more fun, color pink, right? Technically, this should change all of the text inside of my body to be of color pink. Now, if you remember how to see the site itself, we just open it up in the browser and we immediately get to see the design that we built before. So it was beautiful of me with a nice coconut, some social media pages, some crazy GIFs, And this is all we got at the moment. So the interesting thing here is that my text isn't pink. Why? And this is something that happened to me a lot in the beginning. And it's usually just because we're not linking our style CSS with our index HTML. So that's the key line that I deleted at first. And conveniently, our code editors will do this for us, where we'll just write link, press the tab, and immediately we get this whole element drawn for us, where in href, we just have to pass the name of the actual file that we want to draw upon. So I'll just write style.css. And immediately, once I go back to my browser and refresh, yay, all of my text is pink. Now, I'd recommend not doing this while I'm doing it, just because I'm going to right now throw in a bunch of information at you. And you'll still have access to the recording and the extra resources in this page. So ideally, you want to just like focus on this page. So what things could we do with our design at the moment? So let's play with some different stuff. We already have our palette, right? So we can just go ahead and select our hex colors. Let's close this up. Let's pick a nice font design. So let's do a featured pair. I usually like, yeah, this could be fun. Okay. So we need domain. And if you remember how we got them, we just go into our Google Fonts. Let me just set this up. We go into Google Fonts and search for domain. We have our pair. Great. Let's select this style, add it to the cart. We go back. And the other one that we want to grab is called what? Roboto. So I go in here and I do Roboto. Click on it. I have a bunch I could pick. And you see that this is all the different font weights I can have, right? So if I did a font weight of 100, it'll be really thin, and I'll add it so we can see. And we will also have something of a bolder font and maybe a medium. And then I can just go into my cart. I review it. I see all the fonts that I have on my cart, and immediately I have that information. So all I have to do now is copy this link onto the head of my HTML. And once we start calling it in here, so we can say a font family of Roboto, for example. And now if I go onto my site and I hit refresh, yeah, I immediately have the font that I picked. So important thing here is that if you remember the name of CSS, which is Cascading Style Sheets, that means that the last ones will be the ones that will really be implemented at the end. So if I pass this underneath it, my style sheet won't have access to this font. And then it should go back to, oh, it doesn't. Okay, sweet, nice Google Fonts. But usually this one shouldn't have access to the one on top of it, and then everything will collapse. So keep in mind that the order matters when we're thinking of design and CSS. Now, let's start playing with some designs to our body now that we have our fonts and our colors. So we want to make sure, let's set up so that every font, every text in our design looks with that color. So I'll just set it up in here so that instead of being colored pink, it's color gray. And when I refresh, that should be set up nice. I will also make the background hot pink because that was a coincidence that it showed up. I don't know. And so when we're thinking of background, and this is where that key difference between color and background color comes into play, we really want to be doing background color. And then I immediately have that color. I save it, go back into my design. I refresh, and I am hot pink, at which point that gray doesn't look well. Okay, fine. I'll be a bit more passive. Okay. So, Nice. So now let's start playing with some laying out. So at this moment, I have these 3 images, which are all different sizes. So we probably want to get them to be one same size. So what I can do is that I can just call on the image tag and set it a width of, let's say, 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels as well. And height, nice, cool. And I see that I also have this few bullets around. So bullets are not that nice. We want to make sure that we eliminate them. So something that we can do is that we make sure that to our list items, we eliminate those bullets. Because the list, I first call my list item elements, and then I say display, no, sorry. I say list style, none. And by doing that, when I refresh, yes, the bullets have been deleted. Okay, so I have some questions. Let me just make sure I address them. It says, why do you call it font family? Is that the name, or did you just make that up? I wish I would have made that up. That would have been nice. It's actually the name. It's a keyword in CSS. If you just call it font, then it won't work. So if I can leave anything that you're doing in regards to coding, you need to have it exactly the same as the documentation tells you. So at least I use mistakes around. Well, keep that in mind. You want to be sticking exactly to stuff. So for example, I want to make sure that my face looks more like an avatar, right? So, oh, I see that you may be losing me. Are you losing me now? Is that correct? Hello, can everyone see me right? I think someone said that you were losing me. Was that fixed? Yes, no? Yes, now it's good. Okay, awesome. Let me know if you lose me again. I just found out I've been stealing my neighbor's internet, so apologize, neighbors, for that one. But should be all good now. So what I was saying before is that we're going to be changing my face so that it's a bit more round, so it looks more like the avatar that we're used to seeing around. And the way to do that is that we start playing with the borders of my image. So right now we need to change this image, right? And we want to make sure that this image is round. So I go into image and I set border radius of 50%. Now if I go in here and I refresh, now all of my images are round. And it makes sense, right? Because I'm calling all elements with a tag name image and changing the border radius. So this is where we start facing this conundrum, right? Whenever we only want to be editing one item versus another, that's when we're going to be playing with classes and IDs. And this is something that I didn't touch upon on the slides because I wanted to just show you visually whenever we get stuck upon this. And the way we fix it is that we can pass an ID to this image and call the ID avatar. And with this name, thanks to us passing this extra attribute onto my element, I can now go in here, put in a hash that's called avatar, and pass it this border radius that I had previously put in image. And by me doing that, now when I reload, only my face gets in a circle. So this is something that will be really useful when we're thinking of design. We're usually going to be passing classes and IDs to our different elements. And the big difference here is just that IDs, you want to pass it when you're only using one, whereas classes, you want to pass it when you're using a bunch. So, and I'll give you some examples. Let's start playing with divs. So I'll have a division that will be my intro, and we want to have this indented. And I'll have another division that will be my social media, and I'll have another division, and we'll have another division that will be my about me section, and we'll have another division that will be my hobbies, and so forth. And for footer, it's actually nice when we're thinking of web accessibility, which we should always be thinking about. Footer is a nice element to call our section because that way it'll know that that's where that information means. So now that we have our sections, we can start calling them by their name. So I can say this is a class that is an introduction, but it's also just a section. And I can pass as many classes to my divisions as I want. So I can say this is social media, but it's also a section. I can say that this is an about me, but it's also a section. You see, I told you I did a bunch of typos. And then this is hobbies, but it's also a section. So by doing that, I can now pass same attributes to my section class. So let's say I pass it a background color of white, and I can pass only to my intro maybe a background color of gray. Now this will look disgusting, I warn you in advance, but it's just a nice way to show you what the difference is here. And notice the dot, okay? This wasn't a mistake. Here, I pass it a dot because I'm dealing with the class. I would pass it a hash when I'm thinking of IDs. Aside from this here, this is all you need to know to do some CSS. Okay, the rest is just adding some extra fun stuff and playing around with these components. But as long as you're understanding the divs and the classes, the syntax for CSS, you can already design a huge website. So if I run my refresh, check out what happened. Each section, each part of my website that contained the section class immediately received the background color white, and only my intro received my color gray. And that's why I wanted to show you in terms of the cascading style sheets. Remember what I was mentioning before? Because intro is last, then this is the last one that will get implemented. If I move this up top, what color do you guys think the intro will be? White, right? So really take into account, think carefully about where things are going, because that will be a nice little hassle to play along. So aside from this, I don't want to overburden you with information. I'll just add in some extra other properties around so you can see. So for example, text align, if we pass this center to our body, we'll immediately have all of this in the center, which is pretty convenient, right? We can also make sure that our list is inline rather than vertical. So I can pass to my LIs as well. I can say display inline. And then that should immediately, oh, sorry, I did that wrong. Oh, no, it's because of the, oh, yeah. So see what I was saying before? If you missed a comma, everything breaks. So if I put in a comma here, I think that should do it. Yep, there we go. And for example, this is a perfect example of where I would want to add in some margin, right? So that these are separated one from the other. And even in the sections, if in here, I can pass it some padding of maybe 20 pixels, and that'll give me some breathing space in between them. I can pass them a margin of another 20, and that'll separate them. We can give them a width so that they don't occupy the entirety of the screen. So maybe something like 40%, and that puts them over there. So we're probably gonna have to pass in this little hack that I'll tell you what it does in a sec. Yeah. So margin 0 auto, make sure that you're from top to bottom, your margin is 0, but on the sides, it's decided automatically so that it's centered. So it's a nice little hack when you want to center stuff vertically. So I'll leave you with this. I don't want to throw too much information or more than I already have. But my advice would be to just play with it. Just go into this website, check out the designs that are already there, start implementing your own, pick your own colors, pick your own fonts. And ideally, next time we meet, you'll have your own little website like this. And then we can start playing with more layouts. We can start adding a nice footer and start getting in some extra pseudo components in, some icons to really make it more of one of those websites that we've seen around. So I'm going to check out the questions now. If you have any questions, please post them up before we finish. Vanessa asks, what does the hash do? Oh, never mind the hash. Okay, cool. That was probably for the hex colors, I assume, this little bit here. So if that was it, it's just a matter of naming conventions of how I can call that color throughout my page. Any other questions? Something that went over too fast, something that wasn't clear? Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. And if you did, oh, there's a good one. So how do you put a div next to another div? Ah, yes. So that's when we'll start playing with layouts. If you're interested in that, in the resources that I sent, there's one in regards to, oh, I didn't pass it. I'll work on adding that in. But there's this thing called Flex, which can really help you put them in line. And actually, I'll pass this nice resource that I like, which is called Flex Froggy. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a nice game for learning Flexbox, because Flexbox can be very complicated, very fast. And yeah, so really playing with that design of having the divs be inline, or just one on top of the other, on the corner, on the bottom, you know, that's where the really complex stuff for CSS comes along. And we'll be seeing more of that throughout the next courses. Any more questions? Okay. Well, awesome, guys. Great seeing you again. And hopefully we'll be meeting up soon. Have a great night. Happy Wednesday.